Hey everybody, ABC 10 meteorologist Brenden Mincheff here. It is Sunday, therefore we're going to talk some more drought. There's been a lot of drought developments to talk about, both coming from Governor Newsom and the Department of Water Resources. So let's not dilly-dally any further. Let's just jump right into it. We'll start with the precip tracker for downtown Sacramento through March. So far, almost 4 inches of rain. The average to date is about 2.37. That's for the month. So that means we're about 1.5 inches above where we normally are. For the water year, over 24.5 inches. That water year started October 1st. Average is 16, so we are quite a bit above the average. In fact, we are plus 8.5 to the good so far this water year. We're coming up pretty quickly on the 2018-19 water year, where we saw 25.87 inches. And again, this year, 24.66 so far. With another storm in the forecast, we're going to get pretty close by the end of it to this number, if not above that number. We'll keep an eye on it, see if we actually do pass it with the storm coming in. But again, we're going to be pretty close by the time this next system is through the area. Statewide precipitation, there's been a lot of it across California so far in this water year. Even LA has almost as much rain as Sacramento has seen this year. South Lake Tahoe, 32 inches of liquid water equivalent. So when we put on the departure from normal, Palm Springs, less than 1/10 of an inch below normal at this point. And basically everywhere else is above average in terms of rainfall. LA, San Diego, Santa Barbara, Bakersfield, Fresno, Stockton, 10 inches to the good. San Francisco, about 1 foot to the good. Sacramento, 8.5 inches above normal. South Lake Tahoe, 16 inches above normal. And even Eureka and Redding, which kind of have been lagging behind throughout the water year so far. They've seen some rain, and now they are also several inches to the good. And again, with more to come. So let's talk about what Governor Newsom said real quick. If you watched the late week drought update, I just kind of broke it down very quickly as it happened. But we're going to go over it again. His words to the question, is the drought over? Well, it's complicated. You know, we all want a simple answer, but unfortunately, this is not a very simple problem. We've seen a lot of improvement. That's good news, and you can't argue with that. We've gone from 81 drought provisions at the peak of emergency conservation. We're down to 33 now. And that also means that 15% voluntary water reduction, that's gone. We're not being asked to do that anymore. Some areas of concern, however, the Klamath River in Northern California and the Colorado River in Southern California. Now, the Colorado is not just a California issue. It's a really regional issue across the desert Southwest, but also groundwater still has a long way to go. We've talked a lot about groundwater, and groundwater will continue to be a deal, really, as we recover from drought, because it's a long-term drought thing, not a short-term fix like filling reservoirs and restoring snowpack is. But let's jump into the Colorado River a little bit more. We'll take a look at the basin. So this is how they started the water year. So this is the Colorado River Basin. The Colorado River is in blue there. So on October 1st, 2022, when we started the new water year, here's what the map looked like. Here's what it looks like now. So there's been quite a bit of improvement across Arizona, some in New Mexico, and then the Rocky Mountains of Colorado as well. I've seen a lot of improvement, to say nothing of what has improved in California. So when we actually take a look at the numbers, break them down, so this is where we are now, and this was the percentage at the start of the water year. So no drought for the basin has moved from almost nothing to now 50% of the Colorado River Basin, which is really like right here in this corridor. That is now 50% out of drought. Dry, that yellow color, technically not drought. That's either recovering from drought or moving into drought. That's 12% of the area. Moderate, about 25% of the Colorado River Basin. Severe, still about 10%, but that is down from 27%. And then that extreme drought in the red color has gone from 17% to essentially nothing left in the river basin itself. Pretty much just that little area right there in Utah. The score, the Drought Severity and Coverage Index on a scale of 0 to 500, 500 being the worst, it's gone from 237 at the start of the water year down to 98, which is good news. And we can see that here as we look at the Colorado River Basin Drought Time Series. So this is yearly, starting all the way back in the year 2000. And then since then, you can see there's been several extended periods of droughts. In fact, we saw some early in the turn of the new millennia. But then also we saw some more working through the 2010s, which, you know, we went through in California, a very significant drought in the 2010s as well. And then we've seen the most recent one over the last few years here at the end. This is showing you that drought severity and coverage index. So the higher the number, the worse the drought is. At its peak, it was at 447 on that scale out of 500. That was most recently attained on January 19th of 2021. That was the Colorado River Basin. Here's what that map looked like. Again, 477 out of 500 on that map there. So that is a big deal. You can see all of that high-level exceptional drought just all across the river basin. And here's what it looks like this week. Again, down to just 98. So some significant improvement. Taking a look a little bit closer at some of those numbers, this is the Colorado River water storage. So similar to the maps that we look at for Northern Sierra and Southern Sierra, this is kind of what you're seeing here, except for snowpack along the Colorado. So here's that average line for snowpack. Now, this is water stored in snowpack in 20 reservoirs upstream of Lake Powell in the Colorado River Basin. And so that's the average. You can see snowpack is above average, but in terms of reservoir storage, so the blue line is average reservoir storage, and then the red line is where it's at. So here's a little box showing you reservoir storage. That's just kind of expanded there, and you can see how much below average it is still, right? Even though drought has improved and we're seeing record snow, a lot of the Colorado relies on snow melt. So we're not necessarily going to see that going into the reservoirs just yet. Even though our spring melt usually starts in April, especially in the Rocky Mountains, we can actually keep a lot of that snow into May and even the start of June before we really start to see some pretty significant runoff coming out of the Rocky Mountains. So still, we're going to see the reservoirs lagging behind the snowpack here, but we will see the reservoirs come up. That's the good news as that snow kind of starts to melt. Bringing it back to California now, here's our latest drought monitor. About 50% of our state is in no drought right now, abnormally dry. Again, technically not drought, another 15, almost 16% there. Moderate drought, 27%, severe drought, 8%, and no extreme or exceptional drought. We haven't had those for several weeks at this point. All the way from the Mexico border, all the way up to the Oregon state line is out of drought along the coast, Central Valley. In fact, that map there that we looked at just a minute ago, when we're talking about the Colorado River Basin, remember we had that really significant drought, the exceptional level drought in the southern San Joaquin Valley, especially like right around the Fresno area. Well, that is all gone as well. They're not in any drought whatsoever. Still dealing with some in the Sacramento Valley. But taking a look at the California Drought Time Series now, same kind of deal that we looked at just a minute ago for the Colorado River Basin, but this one's specific to California. You can see, again, since the year 2000, we've had several years of drought, followed by a few years where we've been right near average and just a little bit dry. We had a very bad drought in the 2014 range, and you can see our score there was 440 out of 500. That was the worst it was most recently, August 5th, 2014. With this most recent drought, haven't had those numbers quite that high. We did get pretty high, a couple points there with those numbers, but we are at this point trending down, which of course is good news. So here was the peak of that map, August 5th, 2014. Look at that exceptional drought all across the valley and the coast. Really, we were in bad shape at this point in 2014. Here's what it looks like now. The points just 96 out of 500. And again, that drought is going away. It is expected to completely lift in the Sacramento Valley by the time we're done with our wet season. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, the DWR, Preston, the California Department of Water Resources. They were quick to say that this is a very clear example of climate whiplash or hydroclimate whiplash or climatic whiplash. We've said it a few different ways, but basically it just means we've gone from a period of extremely dry to extremely wet. And that brings with it a whole host of challenges. You know, we're trying to work our way through the drought and figure out how to conserve and make sure we have enough water to get through it. Well, now we have so much water and so much snow that that's bringing a whole new set of issues. So that's a climate whiplash, and that has always been a part of California's really climate history, even before humans lived in this part of the world and of North America. But it's getting worse with climate change, and it's projected to get worse. It doesn't mean we're not going to see rain, like we're seeing a lot of rain this year, but it just means that the drought years, the dry years, are going to be more frequent, they're going to be longer, and they're going to be more severe, followed by shorter but much, much wetter wet periods. So again, even though it's always been a part of California's climate history, it's now being made more extreme by climate change, and that is kind of the trademark hallmark, if you will, or slogan of climate change, is that the extremes become more extreme. In the San Joaquin Valley, the Department of Water Resources, with all the water that we have, and especially snowmelt, they say that they expect high river flows all spring, and people should be prepared for that. Doesn't mean we're going to see flooding everywhere. It doesn't mean there's going to be perpetual flood watches and warnings for the San Joaquin Valley. That's not what I'm talking about. It just means that those rivers are going to be running high. They're going to be running fast due to runoff coming down, due to snow melt, and at times some reservoir releases as well. In the Sacramento Valley, rivers will still be high, they'll still be fast, but the Department of Water Resources does not expect any real issues with the spring snow melt, and that's because there's a little bit more storage still up here, right? Trinity, not quite as full. There's a little more storage, a little more groundwater areas, but also the system just hasn't been tested like the San Joaquin Valley has this year. Like, we've actually done pretty well. We haven't had to open the Sacramento Weir at any point, so we still have a ways to go before we'd really be dealing with pretty significant flood issues. Now, that's not to say we won't have any flood issues. There'll be localized stuff, of course, when we really start melting off all this snow. But the other deal is, and we'll talk about this in a minute with snow melt, is that, frankly, the northern Sierra just doesn't have quite as much snow in it as the southern Sierra. And again, we'll talk about that in just a second here with snow melt. But in terms of reservoirs, Shasta is now above 100%, now above that average capacity at 80%. Oroville, 118% of average, 82% capacity in Folsom, primarily used for flood control, but some good news, quite a bit above average, 110% of average in capacity at 66%. So breaking these down a little more, here's Shasta, and you can see current water level is right there. The thicker blue line is your average. And this is just, frankly, a remarkable turnaround from where we really started the water year down here. We even lowered some going into December. And then basically, it was like a switch flipped on Christmas, and it just has rained pretty much ever since then. You can see how much it really has filled since really Christmas, when we started dealing with all those atmospheric river storms. Here's Oroville, very similar story. Wasn't quite as dry to begin with, but it also has significantly filled, especially through the January and February storms, and it is now 118% of average. And even though we let out a little bit of water right here, you see how it went down again? That's because we had to let out just a little bit of water because of all the rain that we're seeing with the previous couple of storms and all the runoff and the snow melt as well. But despite that, it was still filling faster than we were releasing. So even though that water level dipped, it was still, in fact, filling all the way up to that. And so now we're really managing, the flows have come back down, we're really managing the water that's in there, trying to keep as much in there as possible without jeopardizing safety. Here's Trinity. Trinity is kind of the sore spot on the map. 51% of average, 37% capacity. It's down here. We would like it to be right up here. Now, it's just, I've said it a few times in these videos, just kind of a quirk of how the storms have come in. They've just kind of missed Trinity Lake, even though Shasta's really filled and even though Oroville has filled as well. Snowpack, a big player this year. Look at the northern Sierra, 180% of that April 1st average. That's up here. Central Sierra, 227% of that April 1st average. And then the southern Sierra, this translates to almost, I mean, you could really pretty much just say there's essentially 3 years worth of snow sitting in the southern Sierra right now. And so that's one of the reasons that I was talking about a minute ago, that DWR is worried, more concerned that way, more concerned about flooding in the San Joaquin Valley because of how much snow, how much water is up here, and that all has to drain out, and that drains out into the Delta. Now, something we're not really going to cover today, but something we are keeping an eye on is the Tulare Basin. I know we've had some comments about that. Yes, Tulare, the old Tulare Lake is filling. If you don't know about that, it was drained to make room for agriculture and farmland and stuff down there. But it is the terminus for a lot of the southern Sierra snowmelt. So essentially that means Tulare Lake was where everything drained out of the southern Sierra. And then from Tulare, it would slowly work its way up out the Delta. But the point is, with that lake gone, the ground is still sunk in. There's just no water in it normally. But with all the water that's coming out of the southern Sierra, now Tulare is filling. Again, not really going to talk about that much beyond that today, but that will definitely be a topic in another video at some point. Now, combining our reservoir storage and our water storage, or snowpack storage, excuse me, our reservoir storage in the northern Sierra just about at average, a little bit below average. And again, that is mostly due to Trinity because just about everything else at this point is full. But the reservoirs plus snowpack, so your snowpack average is, this gray shading here, and it's above that. So there's definitely above average snow. There's definitely a lot of water up there. But here's what I mean, that there's a lot more in the southern Sierra. Here's southern Sierra reservoir storage plus snowpack. It's all the way up there. The average is here. And then the reservoirs are also above average. So there's so much water in the southern Sierra. and it is going to be a challenge to manage it all as it starts to drain out of the southern Sierra as we work through spring. But the topic this week is about fish and about trout. And they're definitely one of the species. I mean, we all benefit, right, from water, even as humans, but trout, salmon especially love that cold water. It's really beneficial for them. And yes, the salmon season was canceled this year because it takes time for populations to rebound. But we spoke with an expert who said he's hopeful that we'll see some improvement because of the snow melt that we're going to have, because of the cold water, because we have some floodplains filling up, giving the fish more space. But again, it does take time, so we might not see it this year, but next year we'll really start to see that salmon improvement. Here's what he had to say. Super interesting interview. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I do expect to see a positive impact from this year. Yeah, for sure.
But just because we've had one wet winter, it doesn't mean we're out of the woods.
We just closed commercial and recreational salmon fishing. And the commercial fishing interest called for that, which is a real testament to how dire things are. That people whose livelihoods depend on salmon are calling for the closure of salmon fishing tells you that, we're really in the last gasps and need to do something, need to take significant measures. And part of the reason that things are so bad is because we've had 3 bad years essentially in a row.
The way salmon populations work to protect themselves from drought is to return from the ocean to spawn at different times, diversifying your portfolio, in Henry's words. But since we've had 3 straight years of significant drought, it has hit each wave of salmon, decimating their population.
When you have 3 bad years in a row, you've really hit them across that buffering mechanism. So I guess it's a long way to say the water is really timely because things are looking pretty grim. And so, yeah, I would hope that we will see an inundation of a lot of the floodplain habitat, an inundation of a lot of the flood bypasses, which provide floodplain habitat, and a lot more. That floodplain habitat, basically takes water and spreads it out over the landscape. There's a tension, obviously, between the dangers associated with a lot of water, all the flooding that we've seen, the landslides that we've seen, and those benefits for species. And there's also patterns in weather that are more indicative of what some of the climate change models are predicting might be more common, like these big snow with that warm temperatures coming in and creating rain. So some of the flooding patterns that we're seeing are not necessarily the flooding patterns that we might have seen historically. So we're gonna be doing a lot of learning about how these new weather patterns do or don't benefit fish, and the cost benefit of those things versus, some of the real negative and in some cases, drastic impacts for people. But, when we can spread floodwater out on those floodplain habitats on the channel margin, we can inundate the bypasses and create all of that floodplain habitat. Generally, it's a really good thing for all creatures that live in and around rivers. So if we have more cold water that's coming out of our reservoirs, especially longer in the year, then there's a longer window for those fish to get out before things start getting too warm. Also, in the Delta, but also in our rivers, there's like a pretty strong correlation between temperature and the safety of the fish when they're moving out.
When water temperatures are warmer, invasive fish, like bass, are more active and eat a majority of the available food. That leads to stressed salmon not only because the water is warmer, but also because of the lack of food.
Lots of times as the temperature heats up, the rivers become like a less and less hospitable neighborhood to be migrating through.
Of course, with how much snow is in the Sierra, cold water will not be hard to come by this year. The southern Sierra has significantly more snow than the northern Sierra, though, so what does that mean for the fish that typically live in the northern Sierra watersheds?
Yeah, that's an interesting comment that salmon are generally towards the northern half of the state. You know, in the Central Valley and the Sierra, which spans a really big area, that entire area had salmon historically. And in the San Joaquin tributaries, historically, the bulk of the, or significant, I think it was the majority of the commercial harvest was spring run Chinook salmon. And spring run Chinook salmon tend to outmigrate earlier. They also have a life history where they go up earlier, they have to hold, and they have a yearling life history stage which over summers in rivers. So if you think about the effect of dams, you take away a lot of that higher altitude habitat where fish can hold and potentially over summer. If you do that in a landscape like the southern half of the valley, where you have a big flat lowland expanse and then some pretty steep mountains, then you end up making it really hard for spring run to persist. So in the San Joaquin system, salmon have been disproportionately impacted. So in a context where we are having rivers warm up faster because of a changing climate, a fish that's out migrating earlier, that's getting through the rivers in the delta where when the water is colder, is actually a great strategy in general in some years, and especially in that southern part of the Central Valley where temperatures can get really, really hot. So the differences in snowpack in the southern Sierra versus the northern Sierra don't necessarily have a one-to-one translation in terms of the benefits to salmon, depending on how we choose to manage fish in the future. It might be that, the climate change driven changes in snowpack over time down there have a much larger impact on fall run salmon in the San Joaquin system than they do on spring run salmon.
So what about hatcheries? As river modification and climate change impacts the salmon more and more, is increasing use of artificial growing an option?
There's a lot of advocacy around we need more hatchery production because the fish are doing so poorly and we need to be, trying to make more fish from the fish that we have. And basically what hatcheries are doing there are trying to increase the success of eggs hatching because they're not hatching in a river that has lousy conditions. They're also trying to increase the success of juveniles to the ocean in some cases by moving those juveniles downstream past the rivers to the ocean. There is a number of also negative impacts associated with hatcheries. So when the juveniles don't outmigrate through the system, they don't have the same tendency to return to the system. There's also reduced fitness in juveniles from hatchery production in some cases. There's also some evidence that suggests that hatchery practices are creating a overall body of adult fish that tend to be younger and smaller. Younger, smaller fish return more frequently, right? So it takes away that buffering mechanism of the 4-year-old, 5-year-old fish. They also tend to be littler, so they make fewer eggs. So hatcheries are definitely a measure that we use to prop up populations and prop up our ability to eat salmon. and they're an important one, but they're also one that has a mixed effect, and there's a lot of disagreement around the extent of the effect.
At the end of the day, nothing can substitute for Mother Nature and plentiful cold water for the salmon. And this winter might have been our opportunity to reset and recalibrate how we manage our environment, not just for the fish, but for us too.
I'm hopeful that this is nature giving the fish a hand yet again after a bunch of lousy years, but there's also some really important things that we can do in the course of the critical care for human life and safety to get the most benefit we can out of the water when it's around, and also to try to make the non-flood years a little less bad for fish. And I hope that we do those things too.